Alrighty, and we're live. So, hello and welcome to AcadeCon. So, yes, I know we're currently not in the post-apocalyptic city that is Dayton, Ohio. But thank you all so much for joining us here anyway as we make this transition to an online convention. You know, everybody's doing it and it's weird, but you know, we're getting there. So, but we have so much fun stuff planned this weekend, and we're going to be kicking things off with a fantastic panel about superheroes and RPGs, two of my favorite things, and I am joined by three fantastic folks who are going to just educate me so much and tell me all about their experiences with this stuff, so it's going to be great. So I have to say, welcome Miriam, Jeff, and Brandon so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hey.
It's going to be great. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to go around the board, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell our guests, or tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and who you are. So, Miriam, kick us off.
Yay, I get to be the first person. Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Miriam. I use they, them pronouns, and you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie. I basically write a lot of South Asian fantasy, and sort of that's kind of what I do. And in terms of comics and stuff like that, I think I watch more than read sort of the typical like MCU and DC and everything. But my favorite comic is Order of the Stick. That's kind of what got me into RPGs. Yeah, it's still active, and it's actually getting close into the final arc of the entire series.
Oh man,
that rules! Like I
had no idea.
I'm so excited to know that that's gonna be a thing that is like a complete story. That's amazing.
I want the omnibus. Like, give it to me. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, and you know what? You did it already. I was gonna ask what your favorite comic book was right after that, and you hit it with us. You read my mind. Okay, awesome. So our next panelist is none other than it's Jeff Stormer. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then also tell us what's your favorite comic book.
All right, I am Jeff Stormer. I am a podcaster, game designer, and the unofficial LARP designer of the Olive Garden restaurant. You can find my work at jeffstormer.com. You can find me on Twitter at PartyOfOnePod. And relevant to this panel is I am designing and releasing a new game on December 16th called Anyone Can Wear the Mask, which is a superhero RPG. I also went to school for comic books, which is a thing that I don't talk about very often, but I realized was relevant to this discussion. I have a degree in comic book studies, which I think is a pretty cool thing. It's an English degree, but I get to call it that because it's a valid distinction. And my favorite comic book is honestly and legitimately All-Star Superman is my favorite book of all time. It is a book that changed. It legitimately foundationally changed who I am as a person in a way that like I can't really emphasize enough the role that book had. And so that is probably that, or formerly known as the Justice League, which was the Justice League International book that came out around the same time. Like those are the two books that made me realize I wanted to like study comic books and have them be a part of my life forever. And then All-Star Superman was a book that fundamentally shaped my moral compass as a person. So those are my two favorites of all time.
All-Star Superman is such a good choice, and some people know this, no joke. So my son is named Clark because of All-Star Superman. That's it.
You've got me beat.
It's so good. I'm sorry I had to do that, but it's good. All right, I love it though. I'm so glad that's your favorite. And then rounding things off, Brandon, go ahead and introduce yourself. What's your favorite superhero and who are you? Or comic book?
Okay. Well, they overlap.
Okay.
So I'm Brandon Leon Gambetta. You may know me as the designer of Pasión de las Pasiones. I'm also one of the hosts of Stop, Hack, and Roll, and more importantly to this conversation, Protean City Comics, which is a Masks the New Generation actual play podcast where we do all sorts of superhero stories. Sorry, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, and you're also a Twitter mutual, I think, with Rob Liefeld, right?
I'm not a Twitter mutual
Okay,
with Rob
alright.
Liefeld, but Rob Liefeld did tell us that nobody cares about our podcast when we were talking about making fun of him all the time, which I will continue to do because he can't kick me because he has tiny feet. But he can bite
that are
me
hidden
'cause-
behind a rock.
Yeah, they're hidden behind a rock. He does have like 300 teeth though, so I am worried about him biting.
There you go.
You gotta be worried.
My favorite superhero is Sunspot from the New Mutants, and so appropriately, I have the much less emotionally important USA Avengers as my favorite comic book. It is a weird pull, but it's Sunspot after he buys Advanced Idea Mechanics because he realized that he could just buy a supervillain organization and then use them for good. And it's really good, and it has the Maker in it, and the Maker's awesome.
Maker is
And
good.
there's nothing emotionally useful in it. It is so good though. It's so good. Love it.
That's the beautiful thing about comic books. They can either be emotional and they're just fun, and so that's great. So let's dive right in then, and I'm gonna go ahead and pose this. I want to go ahead and pose this first question to Miriam. So I want to ask you then, what makes an RPG a superhero RPG to you?
I think it has to do with the fact that you get powers, and it's it sounds cliche, but it's taking these powers and using them not responsibly, like balancing them out between sort of not being the murder hobo adventures of, like, the TTRPG where it's like, okay, I solve everything with my hammer, like, sort of a thing. But really, yeah, balancing those powers that essentially make you almost like godly, I think, for me.
So there's like a moral scale then in there. Then
Yeah.
Jeff, you saying that as All-Star Superman has kind of helped define your morals, how would you then take what's a superhero RPG to you then?
So I'm gonna bounce off of that. I think Miriam has it exactly right, and I think there's also a quote from a friend of mine and writer for DC Comics, Jadzia Axelrod, about like superheroes are fundamentally power fantasies. Like they always have been. It is a thing that is 100% true of the superhero, and it is like a big part of the superhero identity or the superhero mythology or the superhero concept is like exploring that power fantasy and exploring like who that power fantasy belongs to and like whose power fantasy we are exploring. So for me, a lot of it is taking that fundamental truth, which is like that a superhero story is one about great power and the responsibility that comes with it, to steal comic book language, and like looking at that in different contexts, like Masks in a nutshell, which I think is I think it's safe to say probably one of the most popular superhero games out there. Masks is taking that power fantasy and saying, here's what it looks like if you take the power fantasy idea exploration of superheroes and you put it into a teenager's context, right? It is very much a teenager's power fantasy of what if I had these incredible powers that would allow me to process this part of my teenage existence. So for me, it is having that power fantasy and also I think that's what makes it a superhero game. But for me, what makes it a great superhero game is taking that power fantasy and meaningfully saying, hey, here's what it looks like in this context. Like here's what it looks like when you apply that when you thoughtfully approach it from that angle and say, like, here's how you apply it to like a particular perspective.
Brandon, Jeff mentioned Masks then. So how would you say then, with what has been said already, how does Mask differ then from the superhero games of old? The one I always think about is Marvel Phase Rip, because that's the one that Michael on the RPG Academy loves so much. But how does Mask do things differently than previous superhero games?
So what makes Masks really stand out from other games, and it is my favorite superhero game, or otherwise that's wouldn't be what my podcast is about, is that it really captures the dynamic and feel of a comic, and it gives you those emotional beats. So it is set up in a way that doesn't just say, like, here, calculate out how your abilities work. It says, when you use your abilities, they're very cool, and they can do these very cool things, and they have big effects that are really dynamic. And the way that the Powered by the Apocalypse moves work within that is it essentially makes a little panel for you, because you say, hey, we've hit a move. And so from that move, you are now thinking, we're in a little chunk of space. And so we're in this little comic panel. And that builds out a, just kind of a, I swore I'd stop using this phrase on panels. It creates a mouthfeel of it being a comic. And it gives just like the impression of being a superhero comic, because you get these moments of emotional vulnerability and these moments of doubt and personal interaction, but you also get just explosions of cool power without getting like slowed down. Like superhero fights are obviously a big part of the medium, but unless you're reading like Rob Liefeld, then the fighting is not the entire time. And you want your fights to be big and dynamic and meaningful and have an effect on the world, but you don't want them to be, you don't want to be going like, hey, how far can my I-beams shoot? You want to, and that's just better.
But what if I want to know how far my I-beams shoot?
I mean, you can, but like, I feel like when you spend the time to figure out how long, like if you are wasting time looking at how far can my I-beams shoot, then you're not describing in that moment the fact that you're like you're basically, it's an opportunity cost, right? The more time you spend deciding and explaining how far your I-beams can shoot, the less time you spend actually blasting people with your I-beams.
So it sounds like I have to take issue, because it sounds like you're telling me that it's it sounds like you're taking issue with the fact that there was canon time and ink put to paper explaining that Cyclops' like I-beams are portals to a punch dimension. And
How dare you? No, it is very important that his I-beams are a portal to a punch dimension.
Okay.
It is, however, also important that you be able to say, in this comic moment, in this section right now, we need for his I-beams to be able to set something on fire. And
Fair.
So instead of getting distracted by the fact that it's technically just physical force, for this moment, because we need the fire, it'll just be the fire. And it kind of plays into a little bit of that. I don't want to just say rule of cool, because that sounds, it doesn't capture the essence of what makes Masks really work. But it puts the emotional aspects of it and the being a hero aspects of it above measuring lines.
Nice.
And like, I love Marvel Face Rip. I love a lot of those other games, but give me Masks first.
Okay.
And it turns into a swallow, like what is the weight of a laden swallow question when you start getting into how far can my I-beams go?
Yes, it's one of the reasons that I have my many issues with Brian Michael Bendis, because I don't want so much text on my page. I want to see cool pictures and superheroes doing stuff. But anyway, Miriam, I want to ask you then, as an RPG designer who a lot of your work has dealt with world building and whatnot. So how do you then like capture a world, or at the table create a world where superheroes can interact and exist? What makes a superhero world?
I think, like, in terms of world building, you have to build the stakes for why they exist, because otherwise, like we'd already mentioned previously, no, do not take my mouse. I'm sorry, there's a cat under my table who is batting at my virtual mouse.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, my actual mouse. Yeah, so with the world building, you have to build the stakes for these heroes to be able to do something, and if that's not there, then it is essentially just a power fantasy sandbox. So if there is all these protagonists with all these powers and all these abilities. You have to create then the antagonists and the stakes in the world, like great there are these antagonists that want to run things their way, or they currently there's a tyranny or something of that sort. Therefore these heroes appear when they're needed, which is also kind of the archetype for a lot of mythological stories that get told.
Now that you mentioned it, so I want to talk about it because you were talking about it briefly before we went live. So I think about so often the idea of the westernized superhero with the cape and the big muscles and everything. But what about some of these other stories from different cultures? You mentioned one of them earlier. What was that comic that you mentioned earlier to us?
Oh yeah, so there was this comic that came out in like the 2000s called the 99. It's I believe it was either in Kuwait or Saudi, where this guy made a story called the 99, and it's based on the 99 names of Allah, but more specifically, the 99 virtues that these names depict. So, similar to like Heroes, the TV show, 99 teenagers around the world discover these gemstones that are imbued with these virtues. And then they take on these virtues almost like a superpower and discover their powers, and they have to fix the world. I haven't been able to read the entire thing. I read just like one or two of them, but it was just immediately gripping. And also I could see myself in it because it's taken this thing that I grew up, like I'm Muslim, culturally Muslim, and it took this very core value that was there and turned it into something that I could see myself in, like superhero, like all these things. Because um there wasn't anything like it. And like, just again, representation, that entire thing just really gripped my imagination.
That's fantastic. I do. There's so many great comic books out there that you just don't think about all the time. Especially if you're just like myself, just going into my corner store, pick up my pole and whatnot. That's fantastic. So speaking of that, then I think that's a good thing to kind of jump over to. I want to ask you all about a particular storyline in a comic that you have read or enjoyed, or in a movie. So, Jeff, if you could take one comic book or movie storyline and see it played out at the table, all right, what storyline and what RPG system would you use?
So my answer is twofold, and it's a self-indulgent answer because both of my answers I have either written or am writing a game that does it. So my answer is a little self-indulgent, so forgive me. But the first one, like I said, like All-Star Superman or Superman in general is like a story that like is very dear to me. It's very important to me, and it's one that I think I've had it like the reason that I made Anyone Can Wear the Mask, like it's big on Spider-Man influence and it's big on Superman influence. And part of that is because it's not Superman is a story that like I struggled to figure out how to make work at the table. And part of that being that like accepting and celebrating the idea that like Superman's not gonna get hurt, and like building a story that meaningfully uses that fact not as a hindrance but as a strength of the story, right? One of the joys of All-Star Superman is that it kind of acknowledges like, yeah, Superman's gonna be fine. It's not about physically challenging him. And it's very also true of the original Siegel and Schuster run, is it is a straight up saying like there's nothing that is going to hurt this person. So this is a story about what motivates that person to do good, despite the fact when there is nothing kind of forcing them to do that. I adore that storytelling mechanic, so I made a game that is explicitly that, where you are never in danger of losing. It's just a matter of how you save the day and what that means. The other example, The other example is an unnamed comic about mystery archaeologists that is very, very good, but written by a noted terrible person. So I am redacting the name. But I'm writing a game about that experience of like exploring this hidden pop culture history world through the lens of superhero archaeology. That'll be out in 2021. And then my last answer is a shout out to out and proud non-binary icon Grant Morrison. Much love to them. I'm very happy that they announced that they came out as non-binary yesterday, and I was just excited to share it. Seven Soldiers is one of my favorite books ever. I am a diehard Grant Morrison fan. I have been for years, and the idea of seven different solo stories that interconnect and intertwine is one that I'm obsessed with, and the way that that book pulls it off is one that I would love to pull off at the table. And I feel like now that I've been doing this for 5 years, I'm almost ready to do it.
What was that last one again, Jeff?
Seven Soldiers by Grant Morrison. It was seven solo hero stories that made up a team book of a team of heroes that never crossed paths. So it's the Manhattan Guardian, Bulleteer, Clary, and the Witch Boy. But the thing is, they're all solo stories, and they never have a team up because like there's a whole plot line, but like they're happening at the same time. So you see events from one book unfold in another, but like they're not interacting. It's amazing. And I love it. And everybody should read Seven Soldiers.
I know running a game for 7 people would be difficult, but now what I want you to do is I want Party of One Pod to do 7 individual stories.
That's how I want to do it. That's how I want it to happen.
Oh, that would be awesome.
So there's my 3 answers to your answer of what.
No, that's fantastic. The more, the better. I love it. So, Brandon, what about yourself? What's a storyline and a RPG you would use to bring it at the table?
I've been extremely blessed in that I have now been playing superhero stories for like, is it like 2 years now, 2.5 years? We've been going for a while. And so I've been just slowly like checking things off. And I'm trying so hard not to cheat. Because there's one that I'd love, 3 years, James is telling me, my God. There's one I'd love to see, but not play. And so I would love to see somebody play a God Loves, Man Kills, which is an X-Men comic that was primarily like court drama. And I'd love to see it happen, but I don't want to play it. So someone should do that. But the one that I would want to do is I would love to get into some of the like horror supernaturals superhero stuff. Like the Demon Bear saga from the New Mutants comes to mind, or really any New Mutants comes to mind. And so I've been goofing around with looking at using kind of a variant on Quietus by Ollie Jeffries for that, because that helps put the horror first.
That's awesome. I love some good horror comic books.
I had a second that I thought that every comic I've mentioned so far includes Sunspot, but Sunspot was not in God Loves, Man Kills. So we're okay.
There you go.
Close call.
Fantastic. So Miriam, same question then. If there is what's a comic book or a TV show or movie storyline that you would love to see played out at the table, and if you can think of a RPG system that you would think about using?
So I definitely like the 99, just that concept would be great. In addition, I think like it's one of those things, the Mahabharata, which honestly, like if you had to put it into like a couple of sentences, it's a lot of dysfunctional like it's a very dysfunctional, very large family fighting for the crown. And in terms of like an RPG system, I don't know, like the Mahabharata, like, or at least not exactly that storyline or anything, but the Mahabharata, I feel, because it's such a family drama and like on epic scale and epic power, like all these abilities that each person gets, like the archer and everything. In a really weird, twisted way, I would probably use Passion to play that. Yes. Because it's so much about the personal like, yeah, you can have the big epic battles and all of that stuff, but it's where the sort of biggest kind of interest for me is very much that personal inter-family drama. of like privilege and entitlement and sort of this like denied rights and everything. Like, I think that would work so well for that.
Brandon, how do you think about that?
Well, one of the play sets that's going to come with the expansion to Paseo de los Pasiones is Casa del Atomo, which is basically doing playing the teachers in the X-Men. So like not playing like the young kids. Oh yeah, this is a stretch goal. It was hit. It's coming out. It's going to be great. But so playing like your kind of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast sort of level, and having, you know, romance and lies and betrayal and everything like that. And that is because superheroes are soap operas, because they are like taking a media that you cannot be understated in. You need to show what the emotion is on the face. You need to have them say their feelings, even if you're having people like Brian Michael Bendis out huge paragraphs. Like, you need to know what their emotions are. And so it has to be these big overstated moments, which makes it such an ideal combination of those two genres.
And speaking of soap operas, I did mention it prior to stream that there is a sort of supernatural mythology Hindi TV soap called Nagin, which means like snake. And it's about this woman who actually snake who can shapeshift into a woman. And a lot of there's this huge trope in like Indian cinema and Indian TV of like, usually there's this woman who comes, or snake that comes in and avenges herself to this family because they did her wrong at some point, like killed her mate or something of that sort. And it's like one of the more popular TV series at the time it was airing. So it's like it's a soap. It is like very much a soap through and through, but it is also supernatural folklore.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have people like snakes turned into people and whatnot. That's superhero right there.
Absolutely.
Since we're talking about it, I also wanted to ask you, Miriam, about, so I've heard that you're a huge Bollywood buff. Okay, so yes. So for anyone who doesn't know, like, what's a good, like, are there Bollywood superhero movies?
Recently, yes, there has been. So there's this movie called Krish, and then I think Krish 2, which are actually movie 2 and 3 of the trilogy, because the first one wasn't called Krish, it was called Koi Mil Gaya, which means I found someone, which is and the plot is very similar to E.T., I would think, in terms of an alien outsider comes in, like there's a lot of ET similarities, but essentially the alien grants the son, or grants the dad a power, but then the dad dies, and in the second and third movie it's the son, who is basically the same actor, who gets these supernatural abilities, and he wears a mask, and like it's very much a superhero movie where he's trying to find his dad, and these big corp dudes, I think, are holding him hostage because he knows how to reach out to the aliens and get the aliens to come back, or something of that sort. But yeah, like there's recently been a couple of superhero, and then there's another one called Flying Jut, which I don't know what the plot of the movie is, but he wears a mask and he flies.
Superhero.
And there's a song called Beat Pe Booty, where we're shaking their booty to the beat.
Oh my word. Yeah, that's awesome. Like, you have mask and flying, like, superhero.
That's it. We're done.
That's it.
That's how we should have answered the what makes a superhero RPG question.
Is there masks and can you fly?
Yeah.
Yeah, done. Okay.
And can you dance while flying to the beat? Shake your booty.
Yeah. Those are the three criteria. We did it. Wrap it up, everybody. Yeah. Let's do our plugs and get out of here.
Write it down. Done. So I think for myself, the one thing that I would throw in there is the one that I would love to see. I want to play Ed Brubaker's Captain America but with gumshoe. Like, it's just this spy and trying to figure out who these assassins are running through Washington, D.C. It would just, to me, that would be... And then there's so many cool reveals you can do at the end of this. I love doing reveals at the end of games. And it's just like, it lends itself to that. So I want more gumshoe RPGs that are based on superheroes. That's my opinion.
Definitely see that.
Yes. So, Jeff, all right. Talking about superheroes and whatnot, how could we encourage the heroic gameplay at the table then?
The simplest answer and the most bluntest answer is like communicating beforehand in like a good strong session 0, a good strong like communication saying like, this is the type of story that I want, right? Like, I want a story about heroes helping people. If you sit down and you say that and you come to a consensus on it, I think that's going to be the answer that pulls the best results every time. I think that there is a level of design practicality that we can approach that with as designers. I think that from a player perspective, like, that communication is going to be what does it, right? Like, and the second consideration as a player is like, pick a game that consciously builds that into its design. I think there's a level of going back to my point about the power fantasy stuff earlier, is we as designers can consciously like approach things with an intent and try to unpack some of the or build in a sense of that heroism and that positivity, and like be conscious about the story that we're telling with the games that we design, and be conscious about like who we are empowering, the voices that we are empowering, the characters that we are empowering within our design spaces. I think that like, so a big thing for and forgive me for constantly being like, and this is about the thing that I made.
No, always be pitching. Always be pitching.
Always be selling. Always be closing.
Hustle.
So in Anyone Wears the Mask is a very good example where like I consciously sat down and said, this is a game that is a power fantasy for me, a queer, disenfranchised, marginalized person living in 2020. Like, it was a game, and so it very consciously, it says like, your role is not to, beat the bad guys, or your priority is not stopping the threat. The thing that is always put front and center is that there is someone that needs your help, and how do you save and how do you protect that person? The other thing is, I consciously said, okay, if I'm approaching it with that mentality and making this a power fantasy for that person, it is acknowledging that people in power are not your friend, and making that very conscious in the rules, and saying, but you have the power to unseat those people, like those people, those power structures that are here to harm you and are not looking out for your needs and the needs of the people that you are entrusted to saving. Your role is to upend those power structures. And by superhero punched my laptop. Apologies, I got excited. But it was a big conscious decision as a designer to say, these are the beats of the story that are important to me. I have to bake those very consciously into design and give very explicit direction, so that when players are picking out the game that they want to play, they're saying, okay, this is a game that undeniably espouses these 3 things that are important to me. That is going to make it easier when you're sitting at that table for that session 0 to say, this is a game that asks us to save people as a priority, and asks us to work like to upend oppressive systems of power. Like, those are things that have to happen by virtue of the game. So I think that there's a lot we can do as designers to address that.
That's fantastic. I want to get back to that too, because I got one of our other questions has to deal with mechanics specifically. But Brandon, you were nodding your head a lot with what Jeff was saying there. So how can we encourage other than the session 0, as Richard Kurtz Landry in chat noted, everybody take a drink. So how can we encourage this heroic gameplay at the table?
I think that kind of the way to approach it is to move away from an idea of these are people doing an adventure, and move towards an idea of this is what they're actively trying to do. Because I think a lot of times people sit down at the table and don't really have an idea of the goal. So like D&D, your adventurers, you go on a quest, you get the thing, yada yada. Like, does it matter who you're doing? Does anyone care? Says Rob Liefeld. Does it matter why you're going to go fight these ogres? Not really, because the game is about fighting ogres. And so when instead you have characters that are designed around making the world explicitly better, and you have characters designed around saving people and helping people, that's how you make it super heroic. Like all of we were joking before about the masks and the capes, but what makes a superhero is responsibility and taking on this risk in a way that is meaningfully focused towards helping people and helping to make sure that people in power and people who seize power aren't able to just harm everyone around you. So when you're looking at your sheet in front of you and it says the fighter, that tells you your job is to go out and fight. When it says the wizard, your job is to go out and do wizard things. When it tells you you're the legacy, it's saying you have something to uphold. You have like this mantle that's on you, and it tells you your relationship to saving people. And so if you make your characters and you make the questions that you build less about how do you punch someone and more what is your relationship towards heroism, and what is your relationship towards the people in the city, and what is your relationship towards the idea of being a hero, then you'll get that immediately. The things will start to happen in the right way because your characters will use the buttons and knobs they have on their sheet. They will use if they all they have is a strength knob, then they'll use strength. If they have a connect with the community knob, then they'll use that as well.
It's to your point, like the fantasy of Superman is someone given all the power in the world that chooses to use that power for good and to help people. And so that baking that into the game, I think, is so essential, right?
Those crystal clear motivations.
Yeah, because Superman could also go punch a whole bunch of ogres, but that wouldn't be a superhero story anymore. That would then be a go punch a bunch of ogres story. And there's I kind of think that's how you have to separate it, is thinking, why do we do this? What is the purpose of doing this? And is it for everyone else, or is it so I can get a whole bunch of fat loot? And fat loot is fine.
Consequences.
Yeah.
Like consequences are like a huge thing, because like if you go punch things, it's like cool, but like what are the consequences to doing that? What are the stakes that are there? And it's something I guess I'm keeping on repeating over here of like there has to be consequences for things you do, because in real life nothing's ever clear cut.
Yeah.
So Miriam, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, like also, I mean, one of the biggest tropes you also see in like comics and TV and everything is that superheroes are basically given this very thankless job of law enforcement hates them, the general public kind of hates them, depending on who and how they're helping, and essentially they're seen as vigilantes more often than not, which is this kind of like, when are you actually like doing something that brings justice versus just some person who thinks they can do something and goes punches people because they can.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you then, you mentioned consequences. One of the things I'm not the greatest at the table is clearly communicating to the players what the consequences of their actions are going to be. So how do you do that then as the game master? How do we tell our players like this is what's going to happen without like ruining it for them?
I don't think it's actually ruining it by telling them before like when you set the scene and before you let the players do something, you kind of tell them what's going to happen, not necessarily explicitly, but give the general strokes of like, okay, so you do need to do this thing because clearly they're in your way, or there's something, there is goals you need to meet, but understand how you achieve these goals will result in different consequences. Yeah, sorry,
Oh, I was gonna go ahead.
And I kind of am moving away from that, that idea that surprise the players, but is because that's actually kind of not the greatest thing. Like the players should know everything. The characters don't have to.
There you go.
It's that great, like it goes back to Apocalypse World for me, right? Like it's in Apocalypse World of like show tell the consequences and ask. It's saying it's that it's a classic PBTA move of like say exactly what is going to happen, because then when the player makes that call, they are saying, okay, I am like it's allowing them to consciously make that move in a way that like drives that story forward, right?
Take
It's
that
saying,
risk.
yeah, it's saying if you do this, right? If I you know if I knock down this wall, right? If I'm a superhero and I knock down this wall, well, then there's going to be people saying that I destroyed property and that I'm a menace. And then the player goes, okay, well, then I'm a menace. I'm going to knock down this wall. Like it changes it from a, wait, you mean what happened, to, okay, if I'm going to do that, then like it is both like an in character moment of like answering the call, which is one of my absolute favorite tropes. And also that moment as a player, to Miriam's point, like it's the player going, okay, we are in agreement that this is the story that we're telling, and like I'm excited to discover what that means to my character, but you and I in this moment are 100% in line of like, this is going to be a story where my character knocks down a wall and gets labeled a menace. Like we are in agreement, and then the play, what happens for the character, we'll find out as we go.
That's also one of my favorite tropes. I get chills whenever one of my players, like their character in the game, answers the call. It's just, it's so good. I want to put on some music for them and just say, go for it. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So as we start to, one of the things too, go ahead and if you got any Twitch chat, if you got any questions, go ahead and throw them in there. We'll see if we can get to them here at the end. But I wanted to throw this out to all of you, are there any RPG mechanics that you think work really well specifically for superhero stories? If you got any, throw them out there.
I like combat mechanics that only kick in when you've hit a certain point of combat. So like not combat mechanics that are like the first time you throw a punch, you're now in combat and you're rolling dice. But things that say like, God, I'm very predictable. Like looking at masks when you directly engage a threat. And it specifies in the rules that it's not like when you're kind of holding someone off for a minute, or when you're just kind of exchanging a couple of punches, or you're like, I think when you're playing like rope-a-dope and keeping them occupied, those are things that should happen in a superhero context. But it shouldn't be every single punch. Like you should be able to have a scene where two players are just describing fighting and nothing has happened yet because it isn't the big climactic part of the fight yet. And so like if you're doing I punch, roll, I miss, who misses? Like
yeah, I know.
you deflect, you get, and like there's no reason not to just let the players go wild with it. A game I actually played with Jeff on Protean City, just another plug there, we had so much fighting that wasn't directly engage a threat, because it wasn't time for that yet. It was time for us to get some cool panels in, and so things that encourage that are so good for superheroics.
We got a Twitch question that I really want to get to. So Crumpet Boy asks, so what makes a good antagonist in a superheroic story, especially in a narrative where players have so much control? So Jeff, take a stab at this. What makes a good antagonist like in a superheroic story?
Great. So this is a topic that I've written papers about. I've got a lot of thoughts on this. Your antagonist is a natural extension of your protagonist. It is the natural conclusion, and that goes back to knowing the story that you're telling and the goals that you want your characters to achieve, and like what is important to you as players and as characters, because all of that is going to bleed directly into your antagonist. the idea of like Superman is a working class character, is a working class character created by working class people, created by two working class Jewish kids in 1938 create Superman. So the person that directly opposes Superman is the first person Superman beats in a comic is a crooked landlord, because it is two working class Jewish kids going, all right, who's our villain? And so all of that bleeds into Superman's natural antagonist being Lex Luthor, corrupt businessman. And there's a reason that Lex Luthor's current iteration of a corrupt, evil businessman who is trying to own the world and is angry at the one thing he can't buy. There's a reason that has lasted almost longer than any other iteration of Lex Luthor, and it's because it is a foundational truth of the story of Superman, which is someone who has, separate from the established roots of power, opted to make the world a better place. It all feeds into that. So by knowing your group, right? By knowing your group, by knowing your intentions, by knowing the things that you want to establish and want to say, you can go, okay, cool. We have a story about like mixed up teenagers trying to find their place in the world. Our antagonist should be the grown-up who knows their place in the world, and it's a crappy place. Like, you know what I mean? Like a corrupt grown-up who has accepted a bad place in the world. That is the natural opposite of these confused young super kids. Like it is the ability to say, this is the story we're telling. These are the beats that we're hitting. This is the natural opposite of that.
That's fantastic. I want to bottle that up, save it for later. Miriam, for yourself, what makes a good antagonist for you in an RPG setting?
I think it's actually one that doesn't seem like an antagonist at all. I think one of my favorite antagonists that I love playing as a game master is one that is incredibly smart, incredibly charismatic. Both the PCs and NPCs are relatable. Like it's kind of like, an advisor or a king or like something like that, who is like, you're the good guy, you're working with us, but they have this one ideology that is taken to its absolute extreme. Like I think once I created druids who were the antagonists, and they basically were like nature's out of whack and you're all to blame, so we're going to make it how we need to make the world. Screw y'all. Is kind of the general gist. But like taking an ideology that essentially in its core seems like it's a good idea, but it's taking it to that absolute extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. I also love that villain who can really just relate to the players at first, and then that turn, it's very good. Brandon, I want to ask you a question.
Sabretooth is the perfect villain. He beats up Wolverine on his birthday.
Yes.
The correct answer is if your villain is the person that beats up your characters on their birthday.
Because they care about you, because you matter to them.
Oh, my word. That's so funny. There are several other questions that are coming in that are great. I wish we had time to answer them. I do want to get to one real quick, because Richard Kurtz Landry asked it earlier, friend of the show. Love that guy. I gotta ask though, is there a Columbo comic book? Because I think Richard wants to play a Columbo RPG. That's a superhero.
Yeah. Can I answer? Can I answer? Can I answer them? I have an answer. One More Thing by Nathan Paletta. It is explicitly Columbo the role-playing game. It is explicit. I mean, it's called One More Thing. Like it is the most Columbo game. It is explicitly written to be a murder mystery where there is a culprit and a detective, and it is stated in the rules of the game that the culprit is going to catch the detective is going to catch the culprit. They know, like the detective knows who did it, and it's just about how they bring him down. And the core mechanic of the game is not whether or not the culprit can get away with it, but whether or not they were a charismatic guest star that week.
I want to end this panel with us talking about Columbo. It's like,
I mean, I don't have another hour, or else this would just be part 2.
oh,
Columbo.
my word.
I
And
mean,
then-
it's a similar getup to what you're wearing
It
right
is.
now.
You're not. That's actually why I thought the question was asked. I was like, you know what? That's fair.
Oh my word. And now Brandon Conway's in chat talking about Kate Bishop, and I want to talk about Kate Bishop.
The one and only Hawkeye.
Oh,
Actually, I love other Hawkeye too.
The Matt
I love both
Fraction
Hawkeyes.
Hawkeye, where they're both sort of losers, is the best.
I love that.
Hawkeye with bandages is how Hawkeye should be.
Yes. That's
Okay,
That's
this
that-
looks bad.
That's the ultimate Hawkeye costume. I love that Matt Fraction run so much. It's so good. Every superhero should have a chance to run an apartment complex. Like that's
in
where
Bed-Stuy.
that's where we get to know their true like moral character. Can you be a landlord? Like oh, that's so good. So I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. It has been a pleasure chatting with all of you. But before we get going, let's go ahead and tell everyone where you can find you on the Twitter, I assume, or anywhere else. So, and what you're working on right now. So Miriam, where can people find you on Twitter? And is there anything you're working on right now that you really want to shout out?
Yeah, definitely. So you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie. I am the GM of the Musafirs, which is a actual play South Asian based words. I'm not very good at plugging my own stuff. I'm also a cast of Prison Pals, and also I am a co-caretaker of Utopia, which is a Twitch channel, which is a for BIM POC by BIM POC channel, where I run an actual play campaign as one of the many shows that we have, called Kahania, again set in Sarzamin, which is the South Asian fantasy setting I'm working on. And I am a Kickstarter goal for Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is either on its way to ending or is still going strong. I should probably look up how long that Kickstarter is going for, but it's an amazing Kickstarter. Got so many like talented authors and everything. It's amazing.
Yeah, that list of creators on that is stacked. Like,
Yeah.
and they're doing very well for themselves. That's great. So, Jeff, where can we find you? What are you working on that you haven't told us about?
A whole lot of things. I host Party of One, which is an actual play podcast focused on 2-player role-playing experiences. You can find that at partyofonepodcast.com. I co-host All My Fantasy Children, which is a storytelling, character creation, and world-building podcast on the One Shot Network. You can find that at oneshotpodcast.com. December 23rd, I will be the host of Talking Nog, which is a yearly podcast about eggnog. You can find that. That'll be on twitch.tv/GMJeffStormer. You can find all of my work, podcasts, games, everything at jeffstormer.com. You can go to Party of One Pod on Twitter. And on December 16th, you can go to jeffstormer.itch.io/mask and pick up Anyone Can Wear the Mask, a superhero role-playing about a hero, a villain, and a city.
Yes, we are definitely going to have you on Show and Tell, Jeff, soon to talk about Anyone Can Wear the Mask. It's going to be great.
Jazzed.
Yeah, so Brandon, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at @BLeonGambetta. I'm one of the 2 hosts of the Stop Back and Roll podcast and a founding member of the Stop Back and Roll network, where you can also find Protean City Comics, which is a Masks actual play podcast. We have over 100 episodes of superheroics. If you liked this and you want to try a whole bunch of things, we're trying a whole bunch of things. And let me tell you, 2021 is already shaping up to be weird. And I'm so excited.
Weird was not the word I thought you were going to use, but I'm here for it.
It's great. We're going to get all sorts of cool stuff going on. I also am the author of Pasión de las Pasiones, which is a telenovela RPG, which I am working hard on, and it is coming together so nicely. Very excited. You can catch the quick start on the Magpie Games website. I also have like 3 projects I'm not allowed to talk about because I don't know if I'm going to do them fully or not. But I can tell you 2 of them are superhero inspired. So follow me at @BLeonGambetta or go to BrandonLeonGambetta.com.
That's fantastic. I love it. So, as always, you all can follow me at BezCarTom on Twitter. Yes, it's the Mandalorian medal. I know. All right. And Don't forget, we've got a lot of other panels coming up this weekend. Tonight at 7, Michael Ross will be bringing us his GMing or DMing 101, his classic panel. So definitely tune in for that, especially if you're new to RPGs and just want some basics. And then tonight, I'm very happy that we are going to be having a special episode of the RPG Academy Presents Ghosts of Saltmarsh Sea Drift, where we do a one-shot in Ghost of Saltmarsh, but it's actually just the plot of Need for Speed, or Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. All right, it's going to be a lot of fun. So anyway, just tune in, follow Twitch so you can get all those notifications. And other than that, thank you all once again for joining us. This has been so much fun. I love it. We'll make sure we throw that VOD up so anybody who missed this can check it out, because I want them to get your all's knowledge. And then other than that, as always at the RPG Academy, do not forget, if you are having fun, you are doing it right. Thanks, everyone.